You just want to hear it louder yourself. So you're turning up all your channels, you're turning up your master fader just so you can personally monitor it louder. You're killing your dynamics, cutting off your transients, you're sending your tracks into distortion. You're really compromising quality just because you want to get it louder. Technically, the loudness wars are over due to streaming services regulating, normalizing volume. I still have a lot of students that make all kinds of genres, especially genres like EDM or dubstep and things like that. They're still mastering very loud because they're playing these tracks at festivals. So for me, loudness is very much genre-based, very much format-based. So we'll go over what industry standard loudness is and how to meter that, and I'll give you guys some numbers and some facts about it. But more importantly, I want to talk about how to achieve your desired loudness without compromising quality. Without further ado, let's just get right into this. First and foremost, I wanted to say that this is not necessarily a video on mastering. It can teach you a little something about mastering. The real point of this video is for you to understand loudness, but loudness isn't really achieved just by cranking your levels. If we're just cranking our levels, we could be killing our transients, killing our dynamics, distorting our mix, distorting our master, and we want to get to our desired loudness, but avoid all that. So that's really the point of this video, to get you to understand loudness, how to measure it, how to achieve it, what we're looking for. And as you can see here, I'm in Logic Pro. If you're not new to the channel, you know I use Logic Pro and Pro Tools sort of interchangeably. The point of this channel is to get you to really know what you're doing, and whether you choose to use FL, Pro Tools, Logic, Cubase, whatever it is that you're producing and mixing on, these concepts can apply to any DAW. Logic and Pro Tools just happen to be my preference. I have a couple of examples here. The first example is by an artist named Shannon Hurley. The track is called Spotlight. This is more a track we were working on for sync placement. The second track I have here is Water Dance by Chris Porter and Pitbull. This is an artist out of Jersey. I worked on this mix a couple years back. We also have the final master here. So some of these mixes you'll see I have the mix and the final master here, so we could compare. Also here on the side, you'll see I have a couple different meters up. Some of these meters here are Logic stock. Some of these are free downloads like the Yulin meter that we've talked about here on the channel before. And then we also have our waves meter. This one is not free, but this one I use all the time in Pro Tools, in Logic. Logic does really have a lot of cool and useful stock meters. These are the main two we're going to focus on here at the moment, because we're going to talk about the three main ways that we measure loudness. The first being true peak, the second being RMS, and the third being LUFS or LUFS. LUFS being the most commonly used nowadays. You probably heard that term before. So true peak is pretty self-explanatory. We're measuring the loudest peak of your mix. RMS is more of an average. It means root mean square. It refers to the electrical power your audio signal produces over time. The RMS is found by dividing the peak amplitude by the square root of 2. And the third one we're discussing is LUFS. LUFS, that's the most commonly used nowadays. That means loudness units relative to full scale. And for those of you who have picked up the book, 4 Horsemen of Mixing and Music Production, I do talk about this briefly in my book. In the last section of the book where we talk about mastering, how to achieve your desired loudness, what is an industry standard loudness nowadays, etc. Now, similar to RMS, LUFS are also an average, but it's more of an average of the perceived loudness. And the perceived loudness has to do more with human hearing and how our ears actually hear loudness. Now, if we're looking back at our Logic meters here, we can see that the LUFS are actually an average of 3 different numbers. The M here means momentary, which is actually measuring the last 400 milliseconds of the signal played. The S here means short term, which is the last 3 seconds of the signal played. The LU range down here is the difference between the lowest and the loudest peaks. And then finally, we have our integrated, which is an average of all these numbers. And the main number we're going to be looking at is our integrated, and that's how we determine our LUFS. So according to Spotify, the loudness we're looking for is -14 LUFS or -1 dB true peak. Now, when I play these masters, these are done by all different mastering engineers from all over the country. And you'll see that none of them are necessarily following that Spotify format. So loudness for me very much depends on format, on genre, what you're going for, where this music is going to be played. I've seen masters from dubstep producers and engineers that I work with that are at -5 LUFS, which is extremely loud. And if you upload those tracks to Spotify, the loudness will probably be penalized. And there are websites you can go to, Loudness Penalty websites, that'll tell you what loudness the certain platforms are looking for, like YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, etc., and how much loudness of your track will be penalized when uploaded to these formats. Also, the true peak is a similar concept, because during these conversions and when your track is uploaded, they're giving you a recommended loudness to have the best conversion. But again, depending on format, depending on genre, you don't want to compromise the integrity of your track just for a certain platform. The average I like to give to my students is anywhere from -8 to -12 LUFS. And I came to that conclusion by working on all different genres and styles, dealing with different formats, dealing with radio, etc. Also, I use a lot of different mastering engineers. One of my favorites is Chris Garinger from Sterling Sound. One of his masters are here in the session. He masters some of the biggest records in the world. I've also analyzed masters like Bruno Mars, and some of those masters aren't too loud and we don't want to crush the dynamics. So those could be like -11 LUFS, -12 LUFS. So again, the average I like to give my students is anywhere from -12 LUFS to -8 LUFS. That's what we're looking for. Unless you're dealing with genres like EDM, dubstep, and things like that, those could be much louder. You're playing those tracks at festivals. You want those tracks to have a certain impact when DJs are playing them. I've seen those masters as loud as -5 LUFS. So again, this very much depends on genre and format. So again, let's go over these mixes and masters. I'll play you the first one while we're looking at our meters here. Now that we know what true peak, RMS, and what LUFS are, let's check these out. So this is the mix before mastering. You see our integrated LUFS here are -17.4. You see our RMS is 17.8, and you see our true peak is at about -2.7. And then if you're looking at our stereo output here, it's -2.6. Again, our true peak is basically just the loudest point of the mix. Now let's check out the final master of this mix. Little bit of a disclaimer. It's going to be much louder. You might want to turn your volume down if you got headphones on. You don't want to blow your ears out. You don't want to blow your speakers out. So if you want to turn it down a little bit, the mix and the master is going to be much different. And I want to show you how we're getting a lot of our loudness from our master. Club, he said, you know, I rap for the people, die for the people, bang for the people, rep for the people, man, I'm the people's champ. Dale loca. So as you can see here, our integrated LUFS is -7.3, our RMS is 7.7, and our true peak is 0.2 dBs. So this is all much louder than our recommended loudness from Spotify or any of these other music platforms. This record played on radio all over the world. This record plays in clubs all over the country and all over the world. So again, this very much depends on format, and after converted to Spotify or Apple, still love how the mix and master sounds. So ultimately, we're not compromising the integrity of the record, and we still got to our desired loudness. Now, this is a record recently released that I produced and mixed by an artist named Yancy Abril. She's from New York City. But let's listen to the mix and then we'll check out the master. And we're really getting our loudness out of the master here. But the reason we can get to our desired loudness out of the master is what we have yet to discuss. And what are the things we can do in the mix that allow us to achieve the desired master and the loudness? So as you can see, our integrated LUFS here are -8.6. Our RMS is -10.2. And then our true peak is at about 0 or -0.1. Again, still not following our Spotify format recommended loudness of -14 LUFS or -1 dB of true peak. And that is Yancy Abril, Back to Black. You can check out the music video on YouTube. You'll see that even during YouTube's conversion, the record wasn't really compromised. We didn't really lose anything. Still sounds great, still maintain the integrity of the record, which is what we want, right? And then I'm gonna do this last master here. This mix is by my guy Paulo Javot. I've interviewed him here before on the channel. More like a mentor of mine, Grammy Award-winning engineer from Miami. We could check out his mix. This is a record I produced for another artist out of New York. Her name is Zoe G. This record is kind of like pop reggaeton. So it's gonna be a little more exciting, a little more in your face, probably a little brighter. I'll play you the mix as we're looking at the meters. So if we're looking at our integrated, negative 17.2, our RMS, negative 15.5, and our true peak, negative 3 dBs. And just by listening, I can tell my guy Paulo did a lot more on the mix bus. His mix compared to the master is going to sound very similar. And I wanted to use this example because that's where we want to be too, right? We don't want to rely on the mastering engineer too much. We want our production and our mix to really sound and feel the way it's supposed to sound and feel before we even get it to the mastering engineer. Now, if you're passing it to a mastering engineer, that's great because you'll get a different perspective. He can touch it up, get you to your desired loudness. We're spending a lot of time on these records during writing, production, recording process before we even get to the mix and master. So it's always great to get a different perspective on the mix. Even if you're doing everything yourself, maybe you want to pass it to people that you trust, a mentor, somebody that you work with, somebody you trust their ear, somebody you like their taste. It's always great to get a second opinion. I highly recommend that. But again, we want our production and our mix to really sound the way it's supposed to sound before we even get to our mastering engineer. This final master here was done at one of the biggest mastering houses in New York City by one of my favorite mastering engineers, Chris Garinger. Again, he's done some of the biggest records in the world. You guys could Google him, look him up. It's meant to be bright, loud, hit hard. So let's check this out. And right now our integrated LUFS are negative 7.5, but if I let the record play for longer, that's another thing I wanted to mention. I'm playing these records real quick, but to get the real average, you're actually supposed to play the record for a little longer. Just let the meters read the overall loudness so you can get a better average. But right now we're getting a negative 7.5 LUFS, and over here on the RMS, we're getting negative 5.8, and the true peak, we're getting 0.5 dB, which is a lot louder than our recommended Spotify negative 1 dB, right? So we went over metering, how to check for loudness, the 3 main ways that we measure loudness. We went over a few different masters so you guys could see what professional masters from different mastering houses sound like, feel like, how loud they are. But now we're gonna dive a little deeper into these mixes and see what all these mixes have in common. Again, these are all commercially released records, different styles, different genres, different vibes. But what do they have in common? First and foremost, you see that these mixes are very balanced. Nothing is clipping, nothing's too loud, nothing's out of control. This third mix here, based on the production and the arrangement, it has a little more dynamics, but again, still nothing out of control, nothing too loud. Very balanced. So we're going to talk about how to achieve that in our mix before we even get to the mastering process. So it really brings us back to a lot of our mixing fundamentals. The first thing I want to talk about is something that I have not discussed on the channel yet, and that is the crest factor. So what is the crest factor? If you saw my last video on saturation, soft clipping, hard clipping, we talked about amplitude. Amplitude is basically just a fancy way of saying loudness. So when we're looking at a waveform here, our amplitude is the loudness of the waveform. And you see all our little peaks here. If we really magnify our waveform here, we have our center point, then we have our peaks going up and down. And that right there is the amplitude of our waveform, right? Our crest factor is basically the peak amplitude of our waveform divided by the RMS value. But simply put, I like to think of crest factor as just a good balance in our overall amplitude, meaning that we have a dense mix. The loudest peaks of our mix and the lowest peaks of our mix aren't too far off from each other. They're nice and close together. So if we're looking at a mix here, we'll see like the loudest peaks here of our amplitude poking out. But overall, you'll see that our peaks are nice and balanced throughout the entire mix. We still have some transients here. We're not losing our transients. We're not losing any dynamics. We still have some dynamics here. But overall, we have a nice balance. We have a nice dense mix. And our loudest peaks and our lowest peaks are closer together. That's what we mean by a dense mix. And you'll see the same thing here on the Yancy Abril Bachata record. You'll see the same thing here on the mix that my guy Paulo Javo did on the Pop Reggaeton record. So how do we get that nice crest factor? Again, it goes back to some of our mixing fundamentals, which is balance, making sure our instruments and our vocals and everything is nice and balanced in our mix and in our channels. And that's just controlling our volumes, and good gain staging, making sure nothing is clipping in our channels. And then obviously also compression. I did a really in-depth video on compression, so I'm not going to spend crazy amount of time on compression. I'm just going to put the link to that video here. You guys should definitely check out the video on compression if you guys are still getting caught up in compression or don't understand some things about compression. But the function or the purpose of compression, simply put, is to control the dynamics. So when we're gain staging and controlling our levels with our volume, that's going to help us get a nice crest factor. And our compressor is basically just going to crush our signal, bringing our louder peaks lower, our lower peaks louder, and getting us a nice balanced signal. And then the last way we can control peaks and loudness during our mix is through saturation, hard clipping, and soft clipping. And again, I'm not going to go in depth into that either because I have a full video on just that alone. I'm going to put the link to that up here. But I did want to go over it briefly using this free plugin here that I really like called Free Clip. You guys can download that. I'll put the link in the description. I'm going to put a link to a couple things in the description, like the free Yolene meter, the Loudness Penalty website, along with the Loudness Penalty plugin. And also I'm going to put the link to this Free Clip plugin by Ven Audio. I really like this plugin. You guys could check that out. For all my FL users, FL Studio also has a great stock soft clipper. But again, on my soft clipping video, I recommended a few of the different soft clippers that I like to use. You guys could go check that video out. So this last example is a mix and production that I'm working on with an artist named Shannon Hurley. The name of the record is called Spotlight. This one we basically did for sync placement. It's not completely mixed yet. So I wanted to give you guys an example of a mix that's a little more problematic, that's kind of unfinished, and a mix that we kind of still need to work on, right? So as you can see here, our crest factor is not that great. We have these like peaks standing out, and you can see that peak there's your kick drum. So I'm not a fan of how the vocal is sounding right now. I feel like the vocal could be a little brighter in the mid-range. By the way, a lot of the loudness comes from the mid-range. And if you watched our video on EQing, this is another video I'll recommend. I'll put the link up here. But if you watched our video on EQing, you'll know that a lot of the meat and potatoes of the mix and the production comes from the mid-range. Most of our information is coming from the mid-range. So a lot of the perceived loudness that we discuss when we're talking about LUFS is actually coming from the mid-range of our mix. So I feel like overall, this mix in the mid-range, it could be a lot brighter. We could get things to pop a little more in the mid-range. I'm not a fan of how the crest factor looks when I'm just looking at the mix. These little peaks right here that are really standing out, I know that's coming from my kick drum. So my low end, my subs might not be that controlled. So let's check out the mix without the Free Clip plugin.
We could do this all night, dimming all the spotlights, yeah. You get what you wanted from me, and baby, I ain't never running. Don't know how you got this hold on me, but I swear that you're all I need.
So again, I feel like I could brighten up the mix in the mid-range. That's where we get a lot of our perceived loudness. I feel like I could touch up the balance on this mix, mainly on the kick drum and the low end, so that'll give us a better balance overall. And lastly, like we discussed on my last video about soft clipping helps us to modify the amplitude. So when we're talking about amplitude, we see these little peaks sticking out. So I'm going to turn on my soft clipper here. We have a few options here on this soft clipper. I have a pretty rounded knee here, which is what makes it a soft clipper. It's not going to be aggressive. It's not going to chop off the amplitude. But let's see what it does to the amplitude of our overall waveform. Let me bounce this. So if we look at our waveform before and after, you see how our amplitude is a little more controlled on the soft clipped waveform. And that's a way that we modify amplitude and get a better balance in our mix. But the difference with soft clipping is that it's saturation, right? So we're also introducing some new harmonics. So yes, it helps us control our balance and our levels, but also it's introducing distortion and saturation. So you have to watch out for that. If you really want that, if that's what you desire in your mix, that's cool. But don't always just clip everything just because you want to control the volumes and the levels, because again, it's introducing saturation, it's introducing new harmonics. So I'll play you the difference here.
Spotlight, yeah. You get what you wanted from me, and baby, I ain't never running. Don't know how you got this hold on me, but I swear that you're all I need.
So again, that's modifying our amplitude. It's getting us a better balance. But typically, I wouldn't just throw the soft clipper on the final mix like this. I would address these issues and problems within my mix, with balancing, compression, and maybe if I wanted a little bit of saturation on certain channels, I would do that on individual channels. And then finally, if I love how my mix sounds and I want to throw a little bit of soft clipping on my mix bus or my master, I can do that as well. So we went over a lot on this one. I hope you learned a lot about loudness, how to achieve your desired loudness without compromising your mix, without compromising the integrity of your production. Any questions on this topic, any comments, leave them down below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe, hit that bell as well. And I'll see you guys next time, Coast to Sound TV.